Okay, we got it. All right, so we're going to get started, and people will be logging on as they do over time. I'm going to ask everyone to please mute themselves now, except for Gunjan. And that way, actually, Gunjan, let me have you say two words, literally, like say hello. Well, that's two syllables, just so that your picture ends up front and center.
Hello.
There you go. Perfect. Okay. Just wanted to get that back there. All righty. Here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to this month's edition of the Global Chamber Export Import Forum. I am the moderator, Anita Rodal, president of SBPI Services. SBPI Services helps importers, global companies, and real estate investors save money and time on their cross-border payments. We also broker business and equipment loans, as well as inventory financing for both local distributors and international importers. Now, for anyone who's not already familiar with the Global Chamber, it is a growing collaborative community of CEOs, executives, and business leaders in over 525 metro regions around the world. Its mission is to foster growth in trade, investment, and cross-border business in every region of the world. Our forum today will be about 55 minutes. We'll leave the last 10 minutes for questions and answers and conversations. And again, let me remind everybody to please keep yourselves on mute. I also invite you to put your contact information in the chat. Please make sure you include your first and last name. And if you have your LinkedIn link available, put that in as well. It makes it so much easier for people to find you. And I know that Jem, being the Jem that she is, always sends a copy of the chat. I just make it a habit whenever I'm on a webinar to save the chat for myself, just in case everyone isn't as on top of things as Jem is. So make sure you do get in the habit of saving that. So today we are very lucky to have with us Gunjan Bagla. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Gunjan before we get into the questions. Gunjan is the CEO and managing director of the India practice at Amrit Incorporated. It specializes in India market entry, business development, and India sourcing. Gunjan has over 20 years of experience in helping major clients leverage the opportunities and overcome the challenges of doing business with India. Be they startups or global 2000 entities, Gunjan collaborates with C-level executives to manage full-spectrum India market engagement projects, from prospecting to sale to delivery to execution. This includes primary market research, hiring top executives, managing global manufacturing and supply chains, negotiating distribution and joint venture deals, outsourcing global engineering, and establishing and operating offshore R&D centers. Gunjan has impacted thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in revenue for his clients across numerous industries around the world. Welcome, Gunjan.
Well, thank you very much.
You are very welcome. So I always start off my interviews with three very quick icebreaker questions, just so everyone hears the same thing from all of my interviewees, and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of today's interview. So my first question to you in 60 seconds or less, Gunjan, tell us how you got into this business.
Well, the short answer would be a midlife crisis. Okay. But frankly, in about 2002, I noticed that India had a tremendous amount of potential. But for most Western executives, India was the land of inexpensive programmers and call centers, people who had solved the Y2K problem. And, they were kind of done and over thinking about India in just that manner. So I felt that there was a lot more that the US-India relationship could be. And I took a leap into the unknown. I had never been a consultant before. I didn't even know what consulting was at that time. Other than I didn't like consultants very much. Okay. So that's how my journey began. And it's been, way more exciting and energetic than I had ever imagined it would be.
Well, we're all glad that you did that. Okay, so what do you like the best about what you do, really briefly?
So after we've been working with a client, if we encounter a situation that they would have found challenging. And I see a gleam in their eye, and they say, I know how to deal with this. And we both know, the client and I, that this is because of something that they learned through our journey together. I think that is the most rewarding part of my work. Both my parents were university professors, and they routinely had saw their students have that gleam. And in a way that I can kind of do that in my own work, it's amazing.
It is very rewarding. I agree. All right. So the flip side of that question is, what do you like the least about what you do?
Well, what's happening today? Not this event. This is great. Uh, what I like the least is that I can't get any sleep. In the morning I'm working with my India team. All day I'm working with the US. And today, for example, I have a call with Singapore at 7 p.m., which means that by the time I go to sleep, I'd have been working like 16 hours. And that gets old after a while, but that's the need of the day. That's the need of being global. I wish there was a way I could compress that, but I don't see any way around it today.
No, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And we all feel your pain, believe me. Okay, so now we're going to get into our subject matter. I want to give you all a little bit of background information just so you know. India and the US established diplomatic relations in 1947 following India's independence from the UK. And yes, the US currently has a trade deficit with India. However, just to clarify on that, the news talks about the historical average of India's tariffs on the US being 17% versus the US tariffs on average being 3.3% on India's goods. But those numbers are a little misleading. Um, it's more accurate to look at India's trade weighted tariff rate on the US goods, which is actually 12%, not 17, and the US trade weighted rate, that's hard to say, on India goods, which is 2.8%, not 3.3. So India's comes down a lot more when you weight it for what they're doing. The US's does not come down as much, but the important thing is that the disparity is not nearly as broad as it appears if you just take on face value what the news is saying. So regardless of that, the US administration is proposing or threatening, if you will, a 26% tariff on all imports from India. So my first question to you, Gunjan, is how in the world did they come up with that number, 26%? I know it was down from 27, but where did it come from?
Okay, so the US Trade Representative's Office actually published a detailed document about how they came up with this. First of all, this term reciprocal tariffs that they've used is complete baloney. There's nothing reciprocal about the way the tariffs have been implemented, and it would be very hard to implement reciprocal tariffs. USTR published this formula, looks very complicated, but when you simplify it, it's really the amount of trade deficit divided by the total trade. That's it. Okay. And then they cited a bunch of papers from people, the authors of which have said we have nothing to do with this calculation. But the formula is very simple to answer your question. So India has the US has if the total imports is 100, there's a 26% deficit. So they said, okay, we'll charge India 26% duty. Now, of course, that formula doesn't hold with what they're doing with China. You can't have a 145% deficit, right? So, yeah, so there are certainly some aberrations, but that's their formula.
Yeah, crazy. All right, so let's say that July 9th, the 90-day window rolls around and the tariff actually goes into effect. Is that a reason not to import from India?
That's a great question. Okay, so why is trade with India going up? Why are companies importing more and more from India? And why are American companies selling more to India? That has many, many things involved. But to give you a narrow answer to this, Anita, it really amounts to the tariff differential. Okay, so the tariff proposed for China is much higher. The tariff proposed for Vietnam, which has been the country where imports to the US have grown very dramatically. Okay, and much of that is rerouting from China through Vietnam to to the US. On my LinkedIn, I published a graph from the Wall Street Journal that shows Vietnam's imports to Vietnam's imports from China and Vietnam's exports to the US, and they track almost 100%. Okay, uh, the tariff imposed on Vietnam is 46%. Okay. So first of all, American companies are looking to diversify. They are so dependent on China really since Nixon and Kissinger opened the trade with China, and really since Henry Kissinger really pushed it forward after he left government, all the way till 99 years of age. Okay. The uh, as long as there is a worry about China, people want to diversify away. And which country do you go to besides China and Vietnam? India comes to the top of the list. Okay. Then the second factor is the tariff differential. Okay. If it's 46% on Vietnam and whatever number they'll end up with China, India is lower than that. So it still makes sense. But the tariff differential alone would not move people to India. It is really, do you do you want to be in serious trouble if one day product from China does not arrive? Okay, and we saw a little example of that for a couple of weeks when the 145% duty was in place, and the port of LA almost shut down. Right? Does
Yeah.
that answer
And
your
so many
question?
ancillary jobs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's okay. So let's talk about trade deficits for a moment. In 2024, bilateral trade between the US and India was about $129 billion. India exported 85.5 billion to the US, while the US exported about 41.4 billion to India. However, only about 2.8% of our imports come from India, whereas 7.1% of India's imports come from the US. So there's always another way to look at what the numbers mean and what they say. Um, why is trade with India important to the US? And why is trade with the US important to India?
So let's look at it from the American perspective first. Okay, the and it comes back to China. Okay, when US defense strategists look at the world today, the threat that they see is China. Okay. Now, there are countries surrounding China, uh, Japan and Korea. The US has very good relations with them. But the only country that has had a military conflict with China is India. And most Americans don't know that. In 1962, China invaded India on three different parts of the border. India has about 2,000 miles of border with China in Kashmir, in Uttarakhand, and then in the far northeast of India as well. Okay? There's disputes about territory and so on. So India has a vested interest in wanting to be safe from any Chinese threats. The US has a long-term interest in containing China's military prowess and threat. And the best ally that that the US can find that they don't have yet is India. Okay? This began really coming to fruition after 9/11. And I can get into the details, but today Boeing has exported over $20 billion to India. Okay? The defense companies are doing very well in India because India needs that kind of weaponry and protection and infrastructure. Okay? So, in fact, next Thursday, I am moderating a panel for the Quad at the World Affairs Council. Well, what is the Quad? It's Japan, Australia, the US, and India coming together. Okay. None of them will admit it right now, but this is really, in some ways, a group of free market democracies looking at, a fascist country that is a threat to potentially all of them. Okay. So that's one reason. The second reason, of course, is that the US does have a labor shortage. Okay? And if you want to go to a country that is a democracy and a free economy, India makes sense. Okay? Uh, now look at it from the Indian perspective. India is a growing economy. India's liberalization began really in 1991, 13 years after Deng Xiaoping liberalized China. Okay. And India is a democracy, so you can't raise a building and demolish a building and put up an office or a factory. You can't uproot millions of people as China could do. So the growth was a little slow in the beginning, but it has been growing pretty much consistently since July 1991 until now. Indian companies kept serving the domestic market for a long time. Now they have become sophisticated enough to be world players. So for any of us who are over 40 years old, we are probably on some kind of prescription medication, some kind of generic. I take, you know, I'll waive my HIPAA rights and say I take metformin and I take lisinopril and I take statin. All three of them are made in India. Okay, it's not because I
Yeah.
chose to buy medicines from India, but that is what I am prescribed. Okay, so I call this India Inside, right? Like the old Intel Inside campaign. We don't realize it, but we are consuming things made in India every day. Okay, pharmaceuticals, many other products, and for people in India, for companies in India, the U.S. is the world's largest economy. It makes sense to try and do business with the US, and many Indian companies are doing so.
So in addition to pharmaceuticals, um, actually, yeah, I used to do something through the mail, and I know that they came from India as well. In addition to pharmaceuticals, what else does the U.S. buy in significant quantities from India?
So a lot of heavy equipment like machinery that is so big that it can't go on a truck, is made in India. My former employer, a company by the curious name of Larsen and Toubro, is 100% Indian company, and they make these gigantic pieces of equipment and machinery that you have to put on a barge to ship. And I've been inside their heavy fab facility in recent years. It's located right on the coast, and they are shipping this equipment to refineries, to breweries, to all kinds of process-oriented companies in the U.S. Uh, if if you consume Metamucil from Procter and Gamble, the key ingredient for that is uh, is produced in the western state of Gujarat in India, and the PNG, purifies it and sells it for like 20 times the price that you can buy the equivalent product in India. But it's something that millions of people consume. Uh, a big part of the trade is also around diamonds. So if any of you have bought any kind of diamond, unless we have a billionaire on this call, okay, if you have purchased any diamonds, the chances are extremely high that they were polished in India. They're not mined in India. They might come from South Africa or Russia or wherever they are mined. They come to India, and there's a very vibrant industry of polishing and producing. Used to be low price diamonds 10 years ago, but now it's diamonds that Cartier is selling, diamonds that the top jewelers in the US are selling. Yeah,
Oh my God, how nice! I'll keep
yeah,
an eye out for
yeah.
those.
Yeah,
My
and
favorite
and,
thing.
and really a lot of other, in the automotive business, batteries, radiators. India is not selling very many complete cars to the U.S. Although there was a time just until recently where Ford was importing one of its SUVs entirely made in India. Okay?
Wow.
So yeah, there's the imports from India are quite widespread. Uh, Now, one thing that you wouldn't think of as an import, Anita, but it truly is the large number of foreign students studying in the US, from India, paying full out-of-state tuition. So it is earning dollars not only for their tuition, but for all their eating and living expenses. And when the parents of Indian students come to visit, they don't come for a week, they come for a month. So there is tourism
It's a long
revenue
way to go.
associated with it, and particularly Southern California gains from that. Okay, because we have the largest set of institutions, ranging from UC Riverside to UCLA, where I'm sitting, USC, and all of them. You look, the foreign students, the majority of them are now from India, not China.
So, so that's an interesting point. What else? So that basically that's something that India is importing from the US, basically education. What else does India import from the US?
Great question. So I already mentioned defense equipment. Okay. Uh, and you don't see this mentioned much in the media, but right here in Long Beach, California, Boeing used to make the C-17 aircraft, the one of those large
Yeah,
transport aircraft. Okay.
yeah.
The US Air Force is the largest user of the C-17. The second largest user of the C-17 is the Indian Air Force. Okay.
Oh
Yeah,
wow.
they have, I think, about $8 billion worth of C-17s that they bought. The first many of those were produced right here in Long Beach. Okay. Now mention a completely different industry. Okay, about a mile from where I'm sitting are the corporate headquarters of the wonderful company, and some of you know the wonderful pomegranate juice, but you might not know that they are also the world's largest grower of almonds and pistachios. Well, a few years ago, we had the good fortune to be hired by the wonderful company to take their pistachios to India. Okay. India was buying pistachios from Iran at the time. Iran is the largest grower of pistachios as a country, but Stuart Resnick and his wife Linda have built a $1 billion business growing pistachios in the San Joaquin Valley. And I can tell you, if you travel to the wholesale markets in Delhi and Mumbai now, you will see that they have a picture of Stuart visiting India because almonds, for example, India is now the world's largest consumer of California almonds and a significant buyer of California pistachios as well. Okay, so it runs the gamut. Medical devices made in India and made in the US are being sold in India. If you look at the revenue of the medical device business in India, 2/3 of the revenue comes from products sold by American companies. 2/3. Now there are hundreds of Indian companies selling product, but most of them are selling low cost, disposable, low end product. If you're talking about, a CT scanner, you're talking about, high end stents, all of those are coming from the US.
Oh, wow. Okay,
And that's just the
interesting.
tip of the iceberg. I mean, if it's
Oh,
it's a
yeah.
very vibrant, very multifaceted trade between the two countries. And there's one other statistic. First of all, Anita, thank you for presenting the statistics you did. I had not looked at it that way. So you
Learn
are
when it comes to
inspirational
that.
in that. Um, if you look at the top trading partners for the US, okay, India was at number 26 when I started my company. Today, India is the ninth largest trading partner to the US. And for
Wow.
India, the US is now the largest trading partner.
So,
So
so the moral of the story is we should not mess that up. So,
yes, yes, yes.
okay, so let's see. The top five exporting states to India are in order: Texas, California, New York, Louisiana, and Washington. So you mentioned almonds and pistachios from California. What else? And since we're both here in California, Southern California to be exact, what else does California export to India that you know of?
Well, I already mentioned education as an export, right? And then
Absolutely, yeah.
medical devices, okay? Um, and uh, here in Southern California, there are, uh, okay, so this also falls under defense, but General Atomics makes the world's most sophisticated drones, the MQ-9, which has been used so effectively in Ukraine and was used in Iraq as well as in the Afghan war. The US has cleared the for India to buy over $2 billion of the MQ-9 drones, the armed drones. Okay,
Wow.
in fact, the guy who runs that business, Vivek Lal, is a good friend of mine, and he is in India frequently.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. So everything that we've talked about thus far makes perfect sense to me. But I have this question written down, so I'll ask it anyways. Why is India getting so much attention in recent years, and especially under the current administration? Like, what's the deal?
Yeah, so there could be many factors. Attention to India really began with Bill Clinton in 2000 when he visited India just 2 years after imposing an embargo on India because India conducted a nuclear weapons test. Okay,
Hmm.
just 2 or 3 years after that, Clinton went to India, uh, and it was a very high-profile visit. From that point on, whether Republicans or Democrats have been in the White House, the interest in India has continued to increase. Okay? Uh, Today, with the Trump administration, I think they see a potential for greater trade with India. They also, uh, during his first administration, President Trump really wasn't aware of how geographically close China and India were. I remember in the first visit by Prime Minister Modi, he asked He was surprised that we had a common border between the two countries, India and China. Okay, so now I think they understand the reality very well. Also, I think the strategic threat from China is much more clear because of China's actions in the South China Sea. Okay? So there's an increased interest in working with India. You might not know this yet, but American Navy ships are docking in India. Some of them are being repaired in India. 10 years ago, that would have been unthinkable. I remember my friends at JPL telling me 10 years ago that they couldn't collaborate with India because India was in the same bucket as far as strategic things went as Syria was. Okay? Uh, Even though India was a vibrant democracy, but the rules were restricting them from sharing information with India. Now, next month, you may see India in the news again with something in Southern California. JPL and Caltech, so I should say JPL and NASA, are collaborating with the Indian Space Research Organization to launch the world's most expensive, most sophisticated Earth observation satellite. Okay? This satellite will be
Wow.
launched from India. It will have two instruments. One is American and one is Indian. Okay? It's a $2 billion project, deep collaboration between JPL in Pasadena and the Indian Space Research Organization. So it's not a
Awesome.
form of export. The US did not go to India because India was cheap. The US went to India because this project would not have happened. It would have been shelved because NASA didn't have the budget to do it until India said, okay, we'll do the launch for you. Okay?
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah, yeah. And
Oh,
you'll
it's
see
good
the
to,
news coming out. My brother is actually a space journalist, so he will be covering this. And he might even come visit LA. And maybe we can get him to give a talk at the Global Chamber when he does.
that would be amazing. Good to have
Yeah,
the inside information.
yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. So what are the barriers for American exporters in dealing with India? What do they need to know?
So, and my answer might surprise you. The biggest barrier is lack of knowledge. Okay, still, when I started my company 20 years ago, I felt that most Americans didn't know enough about India. That hasn't changed very much. Okay, we still, when people, at the top level in companies look at international expansion, it's India still doesn't figure as highly as it should. So a lot of my mission in the last 20 years has been just publicizing the facts about India. The facts speak for themselves. Okay, virtually every Fortune 500 company today has a back office in India. Okay, if you buy something on Amazon and you have a issue or a problem, the customer service, the online customer service is coming almost 100% from India. That's how they can respond to you if you purchase something for $12 and you want to return it and there's an issue. You know, Amazon can't make money if they had somebody in the US working that, right? But in India they can. Yeah. So the two countries are inextricably tied together. Okay. And but still there is not that visibility. I still have people tell me, why should I even bother about India? Okay. That's one factor. For us in Southern California, there's two other factors that are soon going to go away. Number one, if I want to fly to India or if an American executive wants to go to India, you cannot fly nonstop from LA. So you have to stop in London or Tokyo or Hong Kong or Dubai or wherever. And that's a nuisance when you're going all the way to the other side of the planet. Well, Air India is soon going to launch a non-stop flight. I had a little bit to do with persuading them. Uh, right now, they're waiting for planes. Boeing is backlogged on the planes. They tried to buy some of the planes that were going for China, but they are not long range enough for Air India to use. But I'd say within the next 2 years, you will see a non-stop flight. Okay. The second barrier really is that, if you look at the city of LA, there are 60 consulates here. Okay. 60 different countries are represented with a consulate here. India today does not have a consulate in Los Angeles.
Really? Wow.
Exactly. That was my response 20 years ago. Okay. So 3 years ago, one of my friends who's the largest importer, oh, this is another thing we import from India. if you see any decorative rocks around any buildings in Southern California or anywhere in the US, those round, nice looking rocks, whether they are half an inch or 2 feet in diameter, they're all coming from India. $6 billion of rocks, okay,
Wow.
coming into the
Okay.
port of Long Beach. My friend who runs that company challenged me 3 years ago. Let's get an Indian consulate here. And I am pleased to say that that is going to happen. Okay, within the next 2 or 3 months, a consulate of India will open, probably in downtown LA. I'm helping them find a building. So those two barriers will go away soon, but they have been real barriers, particularly in Southern California.
Sure. No, that makes sense. So, flip side of that question, then, we talked about barriers. What are the opportunities for US companies to increase imports and exports with China?
I hope you mean India.
Oh, God, yes, I do. Sorry,
That's
India.
okay. That's
Sorry.
okay. The two countries get confused often, and we can talk
No,
about that too
no
in a few
confusion,
minutes.
honestly. I don't know where that came from.
I
Sorry.
know, I know, I know. Okay, so India, the US-India trade opportunity is a very well-rounded opportunity. Okay, uh, it's easier to ask, what areas is trade not possible or not likely. Okay, and I used to
Okay.
say toys was one area where toys made in India couldn't really compete with toys made in China. That is even starting to change. I was at a sourcing exhibition in New Delhi 2 months ago, and there were companies who were not directly exporting the toys themselves, but selling them to companies who were then finishing them up for export to the US. Okay, so you might see more and more Barbie dolls made in India. You might see,
Yeah.
Hasbro trucks and all kinds of other children's toys. Uh, Textiles and apparel. India is the largest grower of cotton in the world. Okay, uh,
Wow.
and if you go to Target and you buy bed sheets, they're probably coming from an Indian company, but there's a much larger untapped opportunity there. Okay, uh, really, there's very few fields where there is not untapped opportunity for trade in both directions. The US government has opened up defense technology to India, so Indian companies can manufacture items that are crucial for the US. So the most extreme example of that I can tell you is that the presidential helicopter Marine One, right? Its cabin is actually produced in Hyderabad in India. Okay? This would have been unthinkable 10 years ago, right? To imagine that something as crucial as a craft that carries the American president would be made outside of the U.S. Now I know, of course, Trump is getting a Qatarian
Let's
plane,
not
but
go
we
there.
won't get into that.
I know. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But no, that is absolutely amazing. Um, so what are some of the key factors to success in dealing with Indian business people? I guess this is more of a cultural question. What do we what do we need to know?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, Anita. Cultural, alignment is crucial for success in India.
Yeah.
And when American companies go to Europe or Korea or Japan or China, they know they don't speak the language. So they'll hire a translator slash interpreter. When they go to India, when they want to deal with Indian companies, most people say, well, one of my physicians is Indian and I have no trouble understanding her. So I understand India. Or
Sure. Love it.
one of my employees is Indian. So I will just ask him to deal with India. And both of them get the companies into trouble because people living in this country like me, unless you're focused on business with India, you have lost touch with what India is and how much India has changed, right?
Yeah.
So the important thing I think is to be able to listen carefully. The Indians speak English, okay, but what I say is they don't think American. Okay, so you can hear the words they say, or you can read their emails, and you can get the illusion of communication. Okay, because
Yeah.
you may read the words, but you don't know what their intent is. You don't know what the meaning is, and you can misinterpret it. The body language in India can also be different. So I used to be a fan of Perry Mason books. I know my mother used to read them, and right around fourth or fifth grade, I began reading them. And one of the things that I never understood was when Earl Stanley Gardner says Della Street shook her head. Okay, because in India, shaking your head can mean yes or no. So
Yeah, here it's like,
I thought she just had something in her hair that she kept shaking her head. But in the US, this is yes, this is no. Okay. In India, this can be yes. Okay. In India, this can be great enthusiasm. Okay. There's many different head shakes. There's whole videos on that. Okay. So that's a
that's
very
hilarious.
obvious example of body language where people miss what the other party is saying. But it's much more complex and much more subtle than that. So you really have to be patient. You have to listen, and you have to cross check that, are you seeing enthusiasm? Are you seeing exasperation? How can you separate those? Okay. uh, so that's really, in my mind, the biggest barrier. Now, the magic is that India is an open society. I know many Americans, my clients, and some people who are not my clients, who understand India as well as I do. I would even go further and say some understand India better than I do. Okay? And the reason is because India is an open society. There's no secret code. It's not a cabal. Okay. It's not hidden or veiled. It's not like the Eastern Asian countries where they don't open up. Okay. And fundamentally, it's not because India is doing anything special. India is a diverse country. So somebody from Kashmir can't understand someone from Kerala. Somebody who lives in Karnataka and they go to Gujarat, they're in a foreign country within their own country. Okay. So they are used to diversity, and they don't mind opening up. Okay? So you just have to win their trust, and then they will tell you more than you want to know.
It's better than not getting enough information, so it's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
So what is the best way to find an Indian customer or distributor?
Okay. Good question. Let me tell you a couple of ways that are not the best. Okay.
Okay.
You don't go to Google and search, or Alibaba and search. Okay. Because you will typically find companies that aren't terribly good at what you want, but they are good at getting listings on those, on Google or on Alibaba,
Oh,
or, you
okay.
know, most of the world's websites globally are built in India. So they're very good at building impressive looking websites, but that doesn't mean that they are good business people or trustworthy or reliable. Okay. So, for small companies, we used to refer them to the US Commercial Service, because US Commercial Service staff in India is very dedicated. They are hardworking. However, However, big however, okay, the cuts that have affected Washington and the US side of the commercial service are now sweeping across their foreign services as well. I was on a web call that a person in Hyderabad said they're expecting a 30% cut in staffing for the commercial service in India, the US. So they may no longer have the ability to serve small and micro businesses like they did. Okay, so we're still going to try and continue to refer small companies there, but I'm doubtful how they can manage. They were growing every year; they were adding staff and improving exports, and now it's going to go the other way. So the ways that are open for mid to large size companies is that you send a team to India. You send 3 or 4 people to India. They spend a couple of years in country. No, not sitting in Singapore or Hong Kong or Shanghai, but actually being in India. That's what Lockheed and Boeing and others did. Okay, or Procter and Gamble did. Okay, now smaller companies can't do that, right? So they typically would turn to people who are biculturally smart. You can find companies like that in India. You can find a few companies like that in the US, and that shortens your learning curve. That prevents you from making mistakes, and that helps you reduce your risk. This is not a sales pitch for Amrit. There are other people who do it as well, but you usually need a third party. The other thing you don't want to do, as I've alluded to this earlier, is find an Indian employee within your company and ask them to do it. Okay. The smart ones who get put in that situation call companies like us and say, hey, I've been charged with this. My boss wants me to do it. And, I need help. But some of them
Ah,
are too embarrassed to
yeah.
admit that. And then they go into India and they get into real trouble because Indians assume that because you look brown like me, you must understand what I'm saying. And when that understanding doesn't happen, the trust breaks down very rapidly. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, you do need some expertise. You can develop it in-house, like I said, by sending your own people, or you can turn to a third party. Okay.
Which would expedite everything. So I was also going to ask you what the best way to find an Indian supplier is, but I'm guessing it's kind of along the same, it's the
Absolutely.
same situation basically. You either have to go there and look yourself or, find someone like you who already knows where to look, how to look, or
Yeah.
already has the resources.
Yeah. So in some sectors, the Indian government has set up private-public partnerships, which they fund partly, to be able to promote Indian exports. Some of those work very well, others don't. Okay. So depending on the industry, I mean, people can ask me, and I can refer them to such services. Uh, but
Mhm.
it's nowhere as strong as we see here, even within our global chamber, where Malaysia and Taiwan and the UK have representatives sitting right here in the Los Angeles area promoting trade with their countries. You know, uh, and I brought this up with the Indian Minister of Commerce, and he says, he told me, Gunjan, what good are you? Then you should be doing this. Which is not a complete answer in my view. What the government can do, certainly small consulting firms cannot do, right? So yeah, but there are some industries where you can turn to those resources as well.
Okay. So last question real quick, because I do want to open it up for a few questions, but so what's your advice to people who say to you, okay, over the last couple of decades, I've learned how to deal with China. Can I simply apply the same methods and techniques to India? Like, what do you say to them?
What I say to them is that if you are looking for a prescription for assured disaster when you go to India, you should apply everything you learned in China to India. And if you want to succeed, uh, please ignore what you learned in China completely. Okay. Indians have access to Google. They use Google Maps to commute to commute and to drive. They use WhatsApp as the primary means of communication, which is owned by Facebook. They watch Netflix. None of these things are available in China. Okay, so Indians are far more attuned to America and American culture. Most
Yeah.
upper middle class Indians, who are the people you'll be dealing with mostly as business people, uh, most of them have at least one close relative living in the US. Okay, so it's a much closer tie. Okay, Indians here have been successful. Indian Americans are very well embedded. We have one married to the vice president uh, at currently, and the previous vice president was was of Indian origin. Uh,
Yeah.
many of the presidents and deans of universities are Indian. The CEO of Google and Microsoft and so many other companies are of Indian origin, right? So it's a different beast when you're looking at India. Also, India, like the US, is a free market democracy. Okay? So you don't, you know, you can succeed in business without ever talking to the Indian government. Okay? You can't do that in China, right? You can't do that in China. When the Walt Disney Company was building Shanghai Disneyland, at one point they had to stop because the Shanghai city government was found to be corrupt and they were dismissed and the whole project stopped for several years. Okay? While we need the government's help going to India, the government is not as much of a barrier or an essential part of your business in India. The respect for intellectual property is much higher in India than it is in China. Okay, so it's a different beast. You have to look at it as you know as an emerging country, but an emerging country that has many of the characteristics of first world democracies. Okay.
Intellectual property is a very interesting point, by the way, because there are, companies are afraid to do business sometimes with China because they basically feel that they're handing their, intellectual property over and they don't know that they can trust that. So,
Right.
um, so if something happened, are people, do you know, if you know this, are people from the US, are they able to file suits in India if they feel that their intellectual property rights have been violated?
Yeah, so India was a founding member of the World Trade Organization. Okay. as part of that, they were required to change their intellectual property laws to confine to to align with global standards, and they did that within 3 or 4 years of the entry of with the creation of the World Trade Organization. Within 3 or 4 years, they did that. Now,
Great.
to specifically answer your question, while in the US, legal costs are high, in India, legal costs are not so high, but the time to resolve something in a lawsuit can take a long, long time. Okay, so uh, it's not desirable to get into a situation where you have literally a lawsuit. But I have examples of when News Corp filed lawsuits in India. They actually won several times. The Supreme Court of India ruled in favor of a foreign company and denied the rights of an Indian company. Okay, or denied the claims of an Indian company, I should say. Okay, so yes, it can. If you are a $1 billion company, you can file a lawsuit and you will be treated fairly. Okay, but for most companies, you want to resolve this in manners other than really a court trial. Arbitration is a big part of it, and I know one of our members, Jeff Dar, is big into
Yeah. Yes.
arbitration. So people will
Yeah.
choose Singapore or London as a neutral venue for arbitration. Uh, Large cases have been resolved that way. Uh,
Great.
yeah. So the Indian government has never been involved in theft of IP, which we can't say of the other country that we were talking about, right? Some Indian companies may have some occasional violations. But because India is so dependent, one thing we didn't talk about is the knowledge economy in India, right? The outsourcing of technical services and engineering. So they are paranoid about even the shadow of IP violation. So I did a study in biotech looking at IP violations coming from India, and I could only find 2 cases in the last 20 years. If I look at lawsuits within California, I'll find hundreds where
Yeah.
California companies have accused other California companies of IP violations. So it's not really a significant issue. It is a worry because people don't know India and they worry about it. But I'll be happy. I wrote an article about this in the life science sector that I'm happy to share with people.
Okay. Well, when you put your contact information in the chat so people can reach out to you, everybody should be linked in to Gunjan. It's pronounced Gunjan, right? Not
No,
Gunjan.
the J is a hard J. Gunjan.
Gunjan. Oh,
Yes,
okay.
yes,
Just
yes.
want to make sure I got that right now that we've already had a whole conversation. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I've
Okay.
been called
So,
anything. I've been called ganja too. So
well, I'm a middle child. I've been called a lot of things too, but it's not what I want to put out to the public. Um,
I'm shameless.
so I'm going to open it up to everybody now for conversation. Whoever wants to say something, first of all, please put your video on so we can see you. If your video is not on, I don't even know you're there. And feel free to take yourselves off of mute. If you want to raise your hand, it's Alt Y or the little icon on there, but Alt Y works just lovely. And feel free to ask away. Francis, you're on.
Thank you, Gunjan. Thank you so much for a wealth of information. I really appreciate it. One question I do have is, we hear a lot about competition between the U.S. and China relative to AI. What's happening with AI? Don't hear. Maybe it's me. I don't hear so much about what's happening in AI in India. If you could kind of give us a flavor of that, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure. So about a year ago, I'm a graduate of the Indian Institute of Technology and one of their alumni leaders. And the CEO of NVIDIA was invited to give a talk to our alumni. So Jensen Huang is a very collaborative guy. He brought 4 of his senior vice presidents with him. All 4 were of Indian origin. Okay. Uh, he described his recent trips to India and his advice to the Prime Minister, who has taken that advice seriously. So what you are seeing at this time is Indian companies investing a lot in developing the applications of AI. Okay, so the people, the people who develop the LLMs and the tools may employ thousands of professionals. But how AI is deployed will employ eventually millions of people. And India needs to create millions of jobs. So that is happening in India. Now, the news about the Chinese DeepSeek has kind of overshadowed all development coming from anywhere else in the world. There are Indian companies working on a large language model that is going to really incorporate a lot of data from India, which has been missing, I think, from the LLMs developed in the West and in China. I don't know whether it will be significantly different or better than the other LLMs that are already out there, but I think within a year or two, you will see an Indian LLM as well. Now, all of these uh, AI models depend on the smartest chips in the world, and India doesn't have a chip manufacturing business yet, but the country has committed a large amount of money to attract chip makers in India. In fact, my classmate is at Micron Technology, and he's running a $3 billion project to to start assembling chips in the state of Gujarat. So you'll also see action at the hardware level, which ultimately will apply to AI chips as well. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Francis. That was a great question. Anybody else have any questions? Anything I should have asked you that I didn't ask you, Gunjan? We have about a minute before I'm going to wrap up here.
Uh, so I guess we should talk about if anyone in the audience has been to India or wants to know something about travel to India.
Actually, you know what? Let me segue over. Sherry's on. She raised her hand. Sherry, go ahead and ask your question.
Uh, Hello, thank you. That was a very informative session. My question actually goes back to actually the question you just asked. The last time I was in India was in 2023, and we had gone there on a trade and cultural mission. One of the things that really stood out coming out of all of our official meetings, especially with the national government, was and I had noticed it here in Texas at the consular events, was the Made in India campaign and program.
Yeah.
And I think they called it Make in India.
Make in India, yes.
Make in India. And of course I remember that kind of was a bit of a barrier to American companies who were trying to and in this particular case, without naming any, it was within the aerospace sector, trying to create a market. They had an interest, but there was an issue around how much of the content was made in India. And so that made it very difficult for this particular company to actually progress in terms of what they were trying to do there. And so with all of the recent changes and discussions around tariffs, I'm wondering how much is the Make in India campaign featuring today in India as part of their strategies around international trade?
Yeah. So let me try to parse that out a little bit. You see this movement in almost every country now. The US in particular, now made in America content, right? So India has Make in India, but it's not what China has used to have, which is Make in China for China. Okay. What India is saying is Make in India for the world. Okay. American companies, when they sell the world over, sometimes they have an issue that their products are too costly, too complicated to sell into emerging countries. Okay, so I'll give you an example. GE Healthcare. Okay, they have a large presence in India. They are making some products exclusively in India for sale into Europe and the world. Okay, so by having a factory in India, they're able to address a market that would have been untapped by them. Okay? So if you look at it from that perspective, it's not just the relatively small Indian market, but the larger market, which has been largely inaccessible to American companies. If you go into Africa, Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, the other smaller emerging countries. So you can actually increase your revenues and your profits. And very rarely will a company manufacture everything in India. So the way it works often is that some core piece that is sophisticated or is a trade secret or whatever, some core piece will come from the US and then arrive in India, and a lot of other product, a lot of the other framework will be built in India. And then it can be sold as a complete product in India, but also to the world. Okay. So in that sense, it is not a threat to American jobs. It is not a competition between the US and India. It's really the US and India allying together to address a global market. Okay. Now, Indian companies are always also investing in the US. A battery company from India is committed to investing several $100 million in Colorado. Okay. So it is bilateral. Okay.
Back and
And
forth.
a lot of the pharma companies are investing big money in the US. Sun Pharma spent $500 million buying a California company not so long ago. Okay. The largest maker of aluminum in the world is an Indian company, and they bought Novelis for about $8 billion. Novelis is a company headquartered in Atlanta. Okay. So it's going both ways. For your particular defense company, I think there were two barriers. Okay.
Yeah,
My guess is
we're gonna have to like cut it off. We're almost like we're at the top of the hour.
okay.
I'm so sorry.
Okay. I can talk to you offline if you want, Sherry.
Yeah, please reach out to Gunjan. Anyway, so thank you, everybody. I wish we had more time. And thanks for the amazing question, Sherry. Appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Gunjan, for all of your amazing information. We could talk for hours and hours. That would be great. If you enjoyed today's Export-Import Forum, please join us next month. We're always on the fourth Thursday, which is not the same thing as the last Thursday. So learned that one the hard way. So it is actually June 26th next month. And in the meantime, be sure to check out the events calendar on the Global Chamber website. If you can't sleep, or like we were saying, like, we're working at 7, 8 o'clock at night because it's already next morning somewhere else in the world, there's always something going on 24/7 because the Global Chamber is truly a global chamber. So make sure you check things out and reach out to everybody. Don't forget to save the chat, connect, network, and remember that global is great. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Anita. Thanks, everyone.
Hold
Thank
on, Anita,
you.
before I got to save the chat.
Yeah. No worries.
Great.